Okay, good morning, everyone. As people are filtering in, we're going to get started. As many of you know, my name is Kate Bohannon. I'm a consultant for the State Department of Education, and welcome to Supporting Students at Clinical High Risk for Psychosis. Couple pieces of housekeeping. Let's see. So thank you again to CERC for doing our tech support for us. They are wonderful. I know some folks have had trouble with the link getting caught in the spam folder or not receiving it. Our hypothesis is that it is getting caught in folks' spam folders, but unfortunately, that's something that we don't have control over. So I'd recommend talking to your IT department to see if there's a way that you can allow the email address. I'm gonna work with CERC and figure out exactly what email addresses those may be coming from so we can share that with you. So hopefully we can resolve this for next year. The cameras and microphones are disabled. Please use the chat for comments, and we do have the Q&A function enabled, so to use that for questions so they don't get lost in the shuffle. The webinar is being recorded and the slides will be shared with all of you. The recording will also be available on the student support playlist on YouTube. Unfortunately, the recordings themselves are too large for us to email, but they are available there. Again, with confidentiality, please be mindful of sharing any identifying information. And if you're having any technical issues, you can send a chat to CERC within Zoom. If you get booted off and can't get back on, please email Linda Adorno, and her email address is there. So this webinar has been approved for 1.5 continuing education credits by the NASW Connecticut and meets the continuing education criteria for Connecticut School Social Work licensure renewal. It also is approved for LCSWs, LMSWs, LMFTs, LPCs, and licensed psychologists. If you are from a discipline outside of those that are listed, you are welcome to request a CEC certificate, but it's your responsibility if your organization will accept the continuing education credit hours. I just realized I did not update the deadline on here for the CEC request form. It's 2 weeks from today. And please note that the certificates won't be sent out until after that 2-week window expires. Some folks had questions about that, but I processed them all the following week in one batch. This may look familiar if you've joined us throughout this year, but this is just a reminder of who we are and who we're here for, our students, our school districts, and what our school mental health staff community looks like. My data for today, and I will drop this in the chat in a minute, but for those of you who joined us for our Connecticut School Mental Health Landscape webinar earlier this year, the 2025 Connecticut School Health Survey, the results are now available. That's also known as the YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. It's available on the Department of Public Health's website, but I will put that in the chat as well. Just in case you're curious, I think it's about 2,000 high school students from across the state complete this survey to gather an idea about all sorts of questions around youth mental health, behavioral health, substance use, healthy habits, screen time, safe driving, a lot of interesting information there. It is for high school only. I know some folks were hoping we would have that for younger students, but we unfortunately don't have a report like that or a survey like that. But this is interesting information to share, and I will put that in the chat. So I would like to welcome our two presenters here. We have from the Prime Clinic at Yale, we have Dr. Emily Farina and Dr. Abhishek Saxena. Okay. And I'm going to, without further ado, we'll hand the webinar over to them, and I will put in the chat the links for the YRBS as well as the PowerPoint slide so you can follow along.
Wonderful. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Hoping y'all can see that okay now. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to be here. My name is Emily Farina. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have with us Dr. Abhishek Saxena. And we're going to be talking today about the identification and treatment of youth at clinical high risk for psychosis. As Kate mentioned, we're coming to you from the Prime Clinic, and I'll talk a little bit about who we are as well. So just a roadmap for today, because I think it can always be helpful to know where we're going and what we're going to be talking about. So we'll talk through briefly about who the Prime Clinic is and who our team is over at Prime. Go through a brief overview of what psychosis is, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page about that, and the importance of early identification of psychosis. We'll talk more about what the psychosis prodrome is and specifically what it means to be at clinical high risk for psychosis, which, spoiler alert, is what we do at Prime. We'll talk about what the early warning signs are, including signs that you may detect in the settings that you work in, and what are some ways to identify those signs. When you do identify them, where and how to refer a young person over to Prime or wherever the appropriate fit is once CHR is suspected. What happens after you refer so that you know once you've sent a student our way, what's going to happen in their life and what they're going to learn. And then we finally have some very kind of school specific information for you. So working, how to work with families or parents in the school setting when you do identify a youth, working with students as well as their peers who may be curious about what's going on, and then some school-based supports that we've seen found helpful for youth that we work with. All right, so the Prime Clinic is a clinic housed actually in the Connecticut Mental Health Center in New Haven, and we are part of the Yale University School of Medicine. So Prime has been around for actually 30 years this year, primarily as a research clinic. And that research clinic was started by a team of psychiatrists and psychologists who had worked with chronic psychosis, disorders such as schizophrenia, and had wondered, when they saw some of the negative effects that can go along with those conditions, are there ways that we can identify people earlier in the progression of the disease and maybe try to even provide them treatment earlier to ideally prevent the onset of psychosis or psychotic disorders altogether, or at the very least, help mitigate some of the negative long-term outcomes? So they started these long, longitudinal research studies that have now been conducted all over the world, where they've identified youth early in the progression of psychotic symptoms and then followed them over the course of time. And what they've been able to do is detect what's called the schizophrenia prodrome early. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is. And so over the years, we've learned a lot about what these early warning signs look like and how we would address them when we do see them. And then in 2018, we were awarded a grant from DEMIS through the federal government from SAMHSA to actually provide clinical care to these youth. And so since 2018, we're providing care to an average of, say, 50 to 60 youth at any one time, where they receive med management as well as therapy. And we're very grateful for those funds that have helped us to do that. I'm going to hand things over to my partner.
Hello, everyone. Excited to talk to you all today about our clinic and what we do. We do love a little bit of participation, so if, I'm going to ask some questions, and we encourage you to put them in your answers in the chat. The first thing I'll ask is I would love to know in the chat if how many of you have ever had familiarity with or worked with a student who you suspect or had experienced psychosis. Again, that could be something like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder with psychotic features, or something else there. Would love to get an idea if you've ever done that, or yeah, you can even do the reaction. Yes. Okay. So there's some familiarity here. Okay, okay. And some people currently working. Okay. So that probably for those who haven't, let's call it you have some colleagues who have, and so it's definitely something that shows up in all of the settings that you all are working in. And so what we'll start out doing again is just getting on the same page as to what psychosis is. So Emily, I'll have you move us to the next slide. So when we're thinking about psychosis, we are thinking about someone who psychosis is usually referring to a state in when a person is out of touch with reality, or they may have a distorted sense of reality. For example, they may not perceive or understand the world the same way that others around them do. This can include a variety of different symptoms, the core ones being hallucinations, delusions, or disorganized thinking. When we think about delusions, those are kind of really strongly held inaccurate beliefs those beliefs that won't change without the without even when provided with contradictory true evidence to the contrary. So those beliefs might be bizarre, feeling like such as like feeling like aliens are coming to get them, or that the FBI has implanted a chip in their head to control them. But however, a lot of them aren't bizarre, and but they're still kind of untrue, or they still are untrue, like believing a partner is being unfaithful to them, or that people are that they who care about them are out to get them or to harm them in some way. Then we have things like hallucinations, which are when someone's perceptions have changed, and it can happen with any of one's senses, and they're perceiving something that others do not, usually in the absence of a stimulus. And so that could include things like hearing voices or seeing people or figures. Uh, then there's disorganized thinking, which is essentially when someone has trouble getting their point across, organizing their thoughts and being able to actually communicate those thoughts to other. Oftentimes, that's related to speech, where speech can become jumbled, confusing, tangential. It might not even make any sense whatsoever. You might have heard the term word salad, and so that can also so that those communication difficulties. Additionally, there's things like disorganized behavior, which is inappropriate or bizarre potentially behavior. You might have heard of catatonia or something like that, where someone isn't moving, or actually more typically like wearing clothing that's inappropriate for the weather that they're in. Like it might be freezing outside. We know that we work with teen boys, and so they're always wearing potentially like inappropriate clothing for the weather. But we're thinking, like someone who's wearing like shorts and it's like snowing outside, and they're not paying attention to like the surroundings and adapting to the surroundings, their surroundings. Those are the kind of core symptoms of what we think about for particularly schizophrenia diagnosis. But there's other things that we know that cause a lot of impairment as well that are common in these disorders. Things like negative symptoms. So these are essentially symptoms that are typical of the human experience, but are not present in people who are experiencing present in a limited capacity for people who are experiencing psychosis or a psychotic disorder. Those things can be like low motivation, social withdrawal, losing interest and engagement with people and activities that they enjoy. And so reduced emotional expression, those kinds of things. And so you can imagine that probably affects someone's ability to engage in school and other aspects of their life. And then also cognitive symptoms, which again you'll probably witness in schools, which can again be new changes in attention, difficulties with executive functioning, stuff like that. And so that's what when we're talking about psychosis, those are the kinds of things, symptoms, or the group of symptoms that we're interested in. Now I have some more questions for you. Um, I just want to get a general idea of like how common out of every 100 people, how common is it? How common do you think psychosis is across the lifespan? So what someone who's for each person, like for each 100 people, how many people do you think will develop some sort of psychosis? You can put that in the chat right here. Or you can answer also any. Oh, actually, I'll start with just the how common is psychosis. Got a five, got a two, got another five, three. Okay.
You guys are good.
Yeah.
Good
I would,
guesses.
yeah. Well, yeah, that's great. We'll get to the answer in just a second. The next thing is, I would love to hear, like, when you think the age of someone who usually develops a psychotic disorder, what age do you all think? I appreciate the engagement. Oh, you guys are really good.
Have you
Very,
been to our presentations before?
uh, very good. And then, what, any thoughts on the causes of psychosis? Genetics, yeah. Stress. Okay. You all got it. Okay. I don't know if we have to do the rest of the presentation. Well, I appreciate you all. You are correct on on all of these. The estimated number of people that we expect to develop some form of psychosis is every three in 100. You guys were all kind of around that kind of ballpark. That might seem small, and it might seem like a lot for some people, but one of the things that we do know I mean, actually kind of relative, like if you think out of like 100, like at 100 people, we're at a high school that maybe has, my high school, for example, each grade level had like 300 people. So just in my grade, I would expect at least 9 people to develop psychosis during their lifetime. And so that's a lot of students who could potentially have really negative trajectories in their life without treatment. And we also know that something like psychosis has a really outsized impact on the person as well as their family and their communities, especially in relationship to those who don't develop psychosis, and as well as in relationship to other mental health disorders. You all were right. It usually develops in late teens or early adulthood, a slightly earlier average age in males, usually around that 18, 19, 20 kind of mark, and then slightly later in females, maybe around that 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 kind of mark. Well, I don't know if this is a fun fact, but we do know that there is a little bit of a spike also for females after menopause as well. And so there's a little, again, increased spike there for people who experience menopause. Um, and then in terms of the causes of psychosis, you included genetics, some environmental factors, stress factors. Our current understanding is that it's not one thing. And we truly, there's research out there that's strong, but we truly don't know the exact causes for psychosis. And it likely is different for each person. But we do generally believe that there's some sort of genetic liability or biological liability, and then some other kind of life factors or environmental factors that someone experiences kind of puts them over the edge of and then developing a psychosis or a psychotic disorder. We also know that it can occur in the context of other situations, such as a medical condition like Parkinson's, or due to substance use, for example, using hallucinogens and cannabis as well.
Can I jump in with a quick question I just saw in the chat? Ooh,
Yes, absolutely.
sorry, I might be lagging. But someone asked if there are any signs whatsoever prior to onset, or is the child generally typical?
We will get to that if I can
Okay.
keep everyone on the tip of their seats. And the short answer is it depends, but we have found some ways to potentially identify people beforehand, and we will tell you about that soon. Okay, yes. So, why is treating psychosis important? As we mentioned, it's a life-altering a disorder, and that again, it has an outsized impact not just on the individual but their entire family and community. Left untreated, it can derail school, work, and relationships, and significantly, particularly after the first couple years of developing that psychotic disorder, increases risk for suicide, risky behaviors like substance use, and increases things like homelessness and disability. And having a loved one with psychosis often puts a lot of strain on the family or caregivers, including worry and additional caregiving responsibilities. And then also we see a global burden that is very large and again outsized for the number of people that we expect to develop psychosis over the lifespan, in terms of social and economic costs. But we do know one thing that's great is that early intervention can change that trajectory, and there's a lot of evidence to support that. And so we will talk a little bit about that. But when we talk about early intervention, what are the periods in which we're talking about? So again, our goal when we're talking about early intervention work is to prevent or reduce the long-term impact of psychotic disorders. And we can do that by identifying people in the course of illness, earlier in the course of illness, and connecting them to care as soon as possible. Um, so you're going to see the typical developmental time period here, and then you will see on the x-axis, or the x-axis is age, and the or stage of illness, and then you'll see this clinical presentation on the y-axis with a more severe and impaired functioning at the top of the chart. And as you can see, like you might see some symptoms early on during this pre-morbid stage. And then we get to this prodromal stage, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But then early intervention has typically focused on this first episode stage. So when someone has already developed a psychotic disorder, and then people who develop a first episode psychotic disorder tend to enter a chronic stage that they experience for the majority of their life. And so we'll break that down in a little bit more. But the part that I did want to start talking to you about is this prodrome. So this part in the yellow. So let's go and talk about what the prodrome is, as well as what clinical high risk for psychosis is. You will hear us say CHR for clinical high risk for psychosis. You might also hear the term CHRP or CHIRP as well. But when we're talking about the prodrome, this is a pretty typical medical term that you may have heard before. These refer to the vague signs and symptoms that come before a full-blown illness or condition. One one example that you may all be familiar with is by now is COVID, or right now also flu season. It's called. But you might imagine that on like a Wednesday, for example, you wake up, you can't get out of bed, you have headache, body aches, fevers, and then you take a test, one of those COVID tests, and you test positive. Now you call up your doctor and you say, I'm having these symptoms. What could it be? And then your doctor asks, and I tested positive for COVID. And your doctor asks, when did your symptoms start? And you realize that if you think about it, you had a little bit of a headache back on Monday, and you didn't really think about it at that much time. You weren't like necessarily thinking about, oh, this is COVID at that time. However, that headache was probably an early, if not the first sign that an illness was starting. That gap between Monday and Wednesday is what we would consider a prodrome, in that case, the COVID prodrome, right? The early signs were there, but they were quite non-specific and they didn't quite raise alarms yet. Right? Like the headache can mean a lot of things. It could be exhaustion, it could be tiredness, it could be the flu, it could be a variety of different things. We didn't yet know that it was for COVID, but it was a symptom associated with COVID. So what we do is we apply that same concept to psychosis. When we ask people who have developed a psychotic disorder to go on and to reflect on the months and years beforehand, many of them, in fact, a large majority of them, can describe changes that they didn't recognize at the time. Oh, yes, thank you very much. And so we know that, yeah, like this slide says, it says about 78% of people who eventually seek care for first episode psychosis have this prodromal episode or these prodromal experiences the months and years prior. We actually expect that number to be higher. These are just the people who can recall. It doesn't mean that 22 other percent people didn't know of anyone, didn't have those symptoms. It's just they couldn't recall. And we know memory is impaired in psychosis as well. So we actually expect this number to be like a much larger majority, if not everyone, like maybe 95% of people likely experience some early warning signs. And so some of those early signs are often not specific to psychosis. Those things, we mentioned some like They might become more withdrawn. They just might be less trustful of other people. They might have a harder trouble time concentrating, and they might be noticing some changes that where they about how things are looking or sounding to them. In these early experiences, when something starts to feel different, that is what we call the psychosis prodrome. And we believe, actually, we know that that is an opportunity to act before a crisis happens. For example, hospitalization due to a psychotic episode. Um,
Yeah, so I'd like to ask the question of the audience too. So you just heard my colleague explain how the majority of people who develop a psychotic episode, a psychotic disorder will have experienced this prodrome period, and this is a real opportunity window. I'm curious if anyone wants to take a guess at the percentage of people who develop a psychotic episode, how many of them we did actually detect in this prodrome period? How many have historically, even around the world at international sites, been detected during this period of opportunity? And I promise we will not be offended by any guesses. I'm hoping 52, but yeah,
you are too. Oh, okay. Nicole knows.
yeah. Yeah, good guesses. I wish it were that high, and we're aiming for more, even more than that. Our hope is that we can detect everyone early one day. Data shows that CHR programs typically detect somewhere between 5 to 12% or so of people who ultimately develop a psychotic disorder during this early warning period. So clearly, we've got a lot of work to do. And part of why we love talking with school professionals is because you all have access and are able to monitor the majority of youth out there and can really detect these symptoms and are really usually the perfect referrers for getting these youth into the care that they need.
Thanks, Dr. Farina. Well, actually, one of the things that I'm wondering also is, like, actually, no, never mind. We'll go to that question next. I'll give you a little bit of a break. So what we use at our clinic is the structured interview for psychosis risk syndrome. So as Dr. Farina had mentioned earlier, our clinic has been here for 30 years, and we were in fact one of the first in the one of the first two clinics in the world that was kind of focused on defining what the CHR or this prodromal experience could look like in or beforehand. And the doctors here at Prime, not specifically me or Emily, but Doctors Walsh, Doctors McLaughlin, and Dr. Woods literally wrote the handbook on psychosis risk syndromes, and which we again refer to as CHR. And I created this interview called the SIPS. This is the main kind of thing that we use to detect CHR and this prodromal experience. And one of the disorders included in that we identify is this attenuated psychosis syndrome, which through work from our clinic and particularly by Dr. Scott Woods, has now been included in the DSM-5 text revision under the F28 specifier, other specified schizophrenia spectrum, and other psychotic disorders. Specifically, again, it's attenuated psychosis syndrome. And that attenuated psychosis, again, is getting at those non-specific or those symptoms that are, where people, well, actually, we'll talk about them in a moment. Um, and I will also say that this is also in the DSM as a disorder to further study as well. It's something that the field is keeping an eye on and is monitoring as well. One of the things that we know about APS and clinical high risk syndromes is that it's a relatively low prevalence in the general population, but it's nearly 20% of new psychiatric intakes. So people who are coming to mental health are coming for mental health concerns or seeking mental health care. We do know that there's quite a few people meet criteria for these kinds of diagnoses or these types of syndromes. And about 20 to 25% of those that we do identify, including through this interview, will have a first episode of psychosis. with many possible trajectories over the lifespan. Thank you very much. And so, and one of the things that I will, actually, no, that's fine. Um, so you are seeing again a similar figure to what we had before, and we had this original phase that was yellow. That was called the prodrome. Here we have it relabeled here as the clinical high risk for psychosis. The reason it's called clinical high risk for psychosis and not called psychosis prodrome when we're looking at it right now is because we are trying to identify people before we know that they're going to go on and develop a psychotic disorder. Usually, prodrome or psychotic prodrome is a label that's given retroactively. But since we're looking prospectively, looking to the future, we don't know exactly what the future holds. We call it clinical high risk for psychosis. Um, and so, what we do know when we identify these people who are experiencing these symptoms, again, through this approximate age range of 12 to 25, we see people go on a variety of different trajectories. We have some people who untreated, and this is completely like if we were to think just untreated, or if someone was identified at clinical high risk, what are the different trajectories? Some of them will go on to develop a first episode of psychosis, again, about 20 to 25%, though that increases to, and after 10 years of identification, could increase up to 35%. They will go on and develop a first episode of psychosis, probably have multiple episodes, and develop a chronic psychotic disorder, something like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder or bipolar disorder with psychotic features, and the various other psychosis syndrome disorders. Some people will not go on and like get that diagnostic threshold that we have for a psychotic disorder, and instead they will just experience they will continue to experience persistent, distressing, debilitating symptoms. Again, kind of at that lesser like severity than what we would consider for one of the other frank psychotic disorders, but still distressing symptoms. And then we will have some people who will naturally remit over time and will have less and less experience as related to psychosis. And so we see, and there's people who go all the way in between all of those different things. But those are the kind of general three kind of trajectories that we expect when we identify someone who is at clinical high risk for psychosis. Again, while a minority of people who will go on to develop a psychotic disorder, we do know everyone at that time is experiencing distress when we identify them, and the majority of them will continue to experience some level of psychotic symptoms, whether or not it's at the diagnostic threshold for a psychotic disorder. Okay, we have a short video for you all. One of the things that while you're looking at this is like we want you to start thinking about while you're looking at this, when would you start thinking about like referring someone for psychosis specific treatment? Like when would and so look at we're going to follow two young men. Well, one young man who's going to go on to develop psychosis and his experience, and just in your mind, and then eventually in the chat, we'll ask you to think about like when you would think about seeking more psychosis specific help for this child. Okay, I'm gonna share. I think Dr. Farina is about to share for us.
This is Joe and Charlie. They've been good mates for a while. Actually, best mates. They spend most of their time gaming and then usually end up outside when they've had enough of Ginger's barking. But their journey hasn't always been easy, especially when Joe was struggling with his mental health and started to experience psychosis. The first things he noticed was feeling disconnected, as though the world was moving too quickly around him. The more he tried to make sense of this, the more he felt confused and overwhelmed. All the things Joe used to enjoy became too stressful, and he felt more and more isolated. Everything looked out of place. Everything seemed too hard. Even the simple things were too much. Joe felt like giving up. After a couple of days without sleeping or eating properly, Joe's perception of reality started to change. He became preoccupied with searching the internet, trying to find a way to feel better. As Joe spent more and more time on his computer, he became convinced that everything had a personal message for him. News articles and ads featured his name and seemed to know all about him. At the same time, he started to notice messages and alerts on his phone from people worrying about him. It was hard to understand what was real and what wasn't.
You're lost, aren't you, Joe? You're hopeless, Joe. You need to figure this out for yourself, Joe. You can't trust anyone else.
The voice became relentless, and Joe believed it to be real. He no longer trusted himself or others. But he realised he couldn't cope on his own. With Charlie's help, Joe was able to seek mental health support. Joe was diagnosed with psychosis. He began to receive appropriate care with the support of his family and friends.
That video continues. It's a very sweet video. Joe gets help. Things turn out great for him, and that's what we're hoping to provide for the people who we identify early. Dr. Farina, did you want to add anything?
I'm curious if anyone out there, as you're thinking about, some of you have experience working with youth who have these kind of early warning signs or even a full psychotic disorder, and may have had the experience where some youth have gotten identified only at the very end. Like what you saw this young person when things got pretty severe, he was isolating, he was, having full-blown hallucinations. And I'm curious about if anyone wants to share in the chat maybe. Is there a point during his trajectory that you would have felt comfortable saying, you know what, something's going on here, and I think I should send him to get an evaluation?
We would love your answers in the chat.
When he began isolating. Yeah, that's oftentimes when people do get referred, and that's because that's now the behaviors you can see them on the outside. Yep.
Yep. And yeah.
Stopping behaviors he used to love. When you're starting to see these outward behaviors, right? So maybe you don't know that the young person is experiencing something internally, but when you start to see his functioning on the outside be affected, that's often when many people do refer over to us. Thank you.
I'll move to the next slide. So we're going to talk about some early warning signs and ways to identify them. And so here's a list of them. I won't read all of them, but like you might see suspiciousness, a relative who has particularly a first-degree relative, like a brother, sister, mom, dad, child, who has serious mental illness, seeing poor personal hygiene, odd thinking, increased difficulty from schoolwork, which are all those kinds of things. Importantly, when we're thinking about serious mental illness around this age period, we're thinking things that are relative changes for that individual. So if that's kind of always the way they've been, there could still be something psychosis there, but it could also it's less likely to only be that kind of psychosis thing. The things that we're really interested in for early identification is if we're seeing a relative change change for that individual. So like someone who was really outgoing and like, being a star player or star student, then they are suddenly in the past year or so have been withdrawing. They're no longer hanging out with any of their friends, not talking to their family, not doing well in school. Like that would be a kind of warning sign for us. I'm wondering, is there any, looking at these, is there anything that's sticking out about these early warning signs to people? Any guesses to what I'm? Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So, one of these things is that they look a lot like other warning signs for a lot of other mental health challenges. And that's one of the tricky kinds of things that we when identifying people early. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about more specific things, but particularly in a youth that you might be working with. These are some more specific kinds of experiences. Again, these are also risk factors for a variety of other mental health disorders, but these are some additional signs that you might look for. So again, we talked about withdrawal, we talked about some of those social difficulties. It's called poor hygiene, again, relative to some of our, already questionable hygiene adolescents. Some excessive anxiety, changes in behavior, again, like suddenly becoming absent, being hypervigilant. And again, we see a lot of people who were excellent students or like good students and then are suddenly getting failing courses and maybe even no longer attending school. Um, Okay, so now we're going to talk about some more specific experiences that we often look for, and that we get specifically through this evaluation, specifically the SIPs. I had mentioned the SIPs earlier. One of the reasons that we use the SIPs, and we encourage you to send people to us, is because the SIPs is a very long, very specific interview that takes a lot of training because so many of the symptoms can be due to all of these can be related to a lot of other mental health disorders. But some of the more specific experiences or genres of symptoms, if you will, that we look for are things like perceptual abnormalities. Again, these are kind of like these sub-threshold hallucinatory experiences where there are changes in how things look, feel, sound, and let's call it all of those kinds of things. So some of the things that we commonly hear is that there's static electricity or white noise, that there's mumbling that's kind of indistinct that they think is coming from somewhere else, but that there's no one else there or no one else is mumbling and they can't quite hear out the words. They might hear on like full on like another voice as well. They might see faces and like they feel distorted or unfamiliar in some way. One of the frequent things that's come up is like shadowy figures with like a black figure with nondescript figure with like a top hat has been something. One of the other experiences that I've noticed is what's it called? Like the walls in classrooms feeling like they're caving in or becoming wavy, or like some of those kinds of things are some perceptual abnormalities that we'll hear about. Dr. Farina, any others that you wanted to point out?
Um, no, I think this is a good list of the common ones, and we've heard a lot. There's a lot of different ones. So if anyone really, the rule in your mind is changes in how things look or feel or heat sound. Um, this can look like a lot of different ways. So, whispering is a very common one, or hearing voices that you can't make out the words, but otherwise, like this can show up in a lot of different ways for different youth.
Okay, so then kind of getting at those subthreshold, unusual thing, subthreshold like delusional beliefs that we talked about. So things like unusual thinking and suspiciousness. Again, those are emerging signs of potentially of delusions or paranoid delusions as well. So they might feel like traffic lights are giving them messages, or that others can read their mind, their thoughts, or that maybe that they are just more mistrustful and they can't quite tell why. They just feel like something's out to harm them. And they might, again, those kind of being like the unusual thinking. They might also start having trouble getting their thoughts organized or getting their point across. They might describe their brain as feeling fuzzy, or that they can't find the right words anymore. Like they might know what they want to say, but they can't communicate it with individuals. That more disorganized communication experience. Um, One of the things to know is that when it comes to these, oh, actually, Dr. Farina, any other ones that you wanted to?
I think some big ones that we've been seeing recently that aren't captured in this list are just like the matrix kind of delusion. So some youth will come in with these beliefs about being stuck in a simulation, everyone's pretending. And then also the kind of Truman Show. So not only am I stuck in a simulation or some kind of fake version of reality, but people are also recording me and watching me and testing my actions. Those two have seemed to come up a lot lately. So those are ones that I would definitely highlight.
Yeah, one more that brought up for me is like feeling like people were being in their life were being replaced in some way, not necessarily by like aliens or something, like just like that they feel like they've changed in some way that doesn't feel safe. One of the things that's really important is that many, if not all youth, usually don't volunteer these experiences. They often, at times, that's because like they may be afraid to bring them up. They may not know how to, or they may not even know how to describe them. That's why it's really important for you, for professionals and you all to be open-ended and being curious without judgment. Because as you can imagine, experiencing these probably feels quite isolating and quite scary for a child. And oftentimes children or adolescents are quite worried that like if they tell people this, it means they're going to be locked up or that people are going to think they're crazy or something like that. We know that these small, like these kind of experiences that we're talking about, or how someone approaches them and first talks about their experience will inform how they continue to talk about these experiences. And so we think it's really important for if a student discloses some of these experiences to you, is that you might that you would want to really be curious and matter of fact about the person's experience. We have some potential verbiage there. You might be surprised about how common your experiences are. I'm here to figure this out with you, and just do your best to explain what's going on. We like as on here, we have some simple and open-ended questions. Oftentimes, like they're trying to like make it come up with words to make it make sense to you, but asking examples is actually just like a great way. It's like, tell me what that experience is like for you. Yeah, can you give me an example? Um, and oh yeah, so one of the things is like you want to treat it like you're talking about like any other kind of disorder. One of the thing we actually find that when we ask children and adolescents these questions, they feel much more relieved. And so it's very important. It's kind of like if we think you've all, I'm sure, had like suicide training and how to ask that. We know that asking about suicide doesn't make these things worse. It's actually can be a relieving and risk. It can help with reducing risk. And so we think about like any other disorder, you want to ask about these experiences in the same way, in that you are just asking them like just that you want to get more information so that you can help them. And not that they're not in a way that you're scared or terrified, even if you might be in that moment. Um,
And just kind of model for you what this would look like. So rather than saying like, hey, Johnny, I'm concerned about you, and have you been hearing things lately? You want to try to just kind of make sure that you're calm and you're confident about when you talk about these experiences. And we'll give you some examples of questions you can ask in the moment, in the next slide. But what you want to say instead is, hey, Johnny, I noticed you haven't been coming to school lately. I have some questions for you I want to talk about. And then you may use some of the questions, like, for example, have you heard things that other people can't hear lately? I know some youth that have experienced that, and I'm wondering if you're having that going on. Really just asking kind of matter of fact.
I'll have Dr. Farina actually, you might as well keep on going.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Okay, so here are some sample questions to ask. So the SIPS evaluation that we've mentioned a few times now is really in depth. It takes, there's a 2-day certification course, and um, it takes a lot of practice to administer. And we have like, I think 70 or so questions on it that we really go in depth with the youth about different experiences that we have seen over the many years that our clinic's been doing this work. But I'll give you some examples of questions and kind of model how I would ask these as well. So for example, have you felt like there are odd or unusual things going on that you just can't explain? Have your thoughts been so strong that you felt like other people could hear them? I really like this one at the bottom. Have you seen things that no one else could see? Have you heard sounds that no one else could hear? I think that really takes away the judgment and you're seeing things that aren't real, and really um, validates their experience so that they know that you believe them, that they're seeing it. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean that they're wrong. Gives them kind of more freedom to talk about it. Have you thought that the world might not be real, or that you might not be real? Have you thought people were following you or spying on you? And when you ask these questions, so some of you, maybe even this audience, have had some of these experiences. And in fact, what we know is that seeing things that are not present or that other people can't see is more common than we actually think, and occurs outside of psychotic disorders as well. The key here is to find out, not only is the youth having these experiences, but what is that experience like for them, and is it impacting them? And we really want to get at, like, is it bothering them? Is it causing them problems in their life? Like, maybe this is something that their family members also experience, and it actually brings them purpose or joy in their life. When it starts interfering with their functioning, that's when we get concerned and really want to take a closer look and do an evaluation. So in addition to those questions that we mentioned that you might want to ask them if you can get them in a room to talk about it, we also have a screener to try to make this a little bit easier on people who may be referring youth over. So the prime screen is a brief 12-item self-report questionnaire. So the youth is supposed to fill this out on their own, and we can share this over too with any documents that are sent out. The prime screen is designed to ask the youth, have you had these experiences, or how much do you agree with these experiences over the past year of your life? Ranging from 0, which is definitely disagree, right? I know these haven't occurred in my life, all the way to 6, which is definitely agree. And there is a way to score it. We can send over that scoring criteria too. But I think for your purposes, what may be the most useful way to think about this measure is to use it as an interview, right? If you think something's going on, you give this screener to a young person that you're working with. And then you look at it and see, anything a 4 or above, so that's slightly agree or above, I would question, like, why do they think this might be happening to them? And then I would just talk to them about it. So I'd say, like, okay, so on here, you said that you slightly agree that you think you might be able to predict the future. Tell me more about that. And then you might get into some other questions that these are kind of ways we get around it in our interview too, is what's that experience like for you? Is it bothering you? Is it getting in the way of you getting things done, like your homework, like sleeping, like hanging out with friends? Do you do anything differently because you have that experience, because you feel like you can predict the future, right? Like, so maybe they have these thoughts that they can predict the future, and they know that an asteroid is going to hit the Earth tomorrow. And so therefore they're starting to kind of try to find safe places and not be out in the open. So they're doing something different because they believe this might be true. And how often is that experience happening, right? If it happened one time a few months ago, we're not really concerned. But if it's happening more often, a few times a month, or certainly on a daily basis, that's when we really want to take a closer look at these symptoms. So everything we've talked about up to this point is, why would we want to identify this potential prodrome period, or CHR? What are signs you can look for? Giving you some kind of questions you can ask, a screener you can use. So let's say now you've identified a youth that you think would be good to refer over. You're not really sure if they're having these experiences, and you think they would benefit from an evaluation. What do you do? So we have a couple of ways that you can refer. I'll start with our traditional referral process. So Prime can actually take, and I apologize, this slide's outdated by about a week or so. We can actually take anyone between the ages of 12 to 30 for an evaluation now. The key is they must have an IQ of over 70 and be verbal. So they must be able to have a verbal interview. The reason for that is because the entire evaluation has to be self-report and the youth has to endorse these things themselves. So if you have someone who's maybe an IQ of right around 70, 71, what I always say is when in doubt, send them over if you think they're able to get through the interview. And we'll try. There's always a chance that we may find that they're not understanding the questions and not be able to complete the interview, but it's worth a shot. The other criteria for our evaluation is, well, they must live in the state of Connecticut, but that shouldn't be a problem for any of you. And they must have never met criteria for a full psychotic disorder in their lifetime. So they must have never been, say, diagnosed definitively with schizophrenia in the past. That one's a little bit looser just because sometimes we do find that people get diagnoses on their medical records that maybe haven't been kind of fully teased out yet. So maybe they went to an emergency department and someone diagnosed them with a psychotic disorder, but maybe it's still worth giving them the evaluation just to clarify if they've ever reached that level. So that one I would be a little bit less conservative about if you're thinking about that. So what happens is once you send someone over to us,
I'll just, if I could really interrupt really quickly, I'll just also add if it's a brand new diagnosis, like it's like within the past few years, I would recommend them sending it to us regardless because these things do tend to change and as people are figuring these things out. So especially if it's a brand new diagnosis in the past couple of years, we would recommend you to send them to us regardless.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's say you notice this, they notice it, or their parents notice it. Somebody reaches out to us, and any one of those people can reach out to us. You can reach out as the referrer as well directly. Once we have permission to speak to the family, of course, if they're under 18, we would talk with the parents. We would conduct a brief screening over telephone. It usually takes 10 minutes or less. If you're able to do a screening, that's great. As the referrer, if the parents are able to do a screening too, we would do that as well. And that's really to check to make sure that they're eligible. Then after that, we'll schedule an evaluation. The eval usually gets scheduled, certainly within a month. We try to aim for like 1 to 3 weeks. And that evaluation is done completely over Zoom. And it takes somewhere between 1 to 2 hours to complete. So I like to say I think it's pretty painless for the young person. We do have some cases, certainly when a young person is maybe too paranoid to use technology and doesn't want to go on Zoom, or we try the eval and for some reason we just can't keep them focused over Zoom, in which case we can set up an in-person evaluation in New Haven too. But we are located in a community mental health center with kind of more chronic and older patients. And so sometimes that can be a bit jarring for a youth to come into the building. So once the evaluation is done, we then get them feedback within the week. And the feedback looks like, if we boil it down to the basic bones, one of 3 things. So does this young person already have a psychotic disorder? Are they not quite there, but they're in this clinical high risk range? And we can talk about options once that's identified. Or is what this young person is experiencing at the time of the evaluation not at all consistent with psychosis, not on the psychosis spectrum? We give them that feedback, or of course, if they're under 18, the parents that get that feedback. And then we also really strive to get that feedback back to you all as well. We do need a release on file for that, of course. So sometimes that can't happen. Rarely, though. So that's how a traditional referral process and what happens. We've also expanded a bit to do some more screening. And I want to let you know this too, especially in case you're working in a school that, I know there are many screeners out there and some schools are required to give a lot of screeners. But in case your school is interested in implementing some kind of a screener, which would be most effective in like a school-based mental health type of clinic or like a place where youth are seeking help for concerns, that screener can be implemented. And we have a project that we've started over the last almost 4 years now, where we've actually done universal screening for everyone between the age of 12 to 25 who shows up at one of these 3 clinics in the New Haven area. And this is really to try to, as you can see, some of the symptoms that we are trying to detect can be hard to detect. And as I mentioned before, we and other CHR programs around the world have historically had difficulty getting more people detected during this time. And so we think that by using screening, we may be able to catch more people in a broader range of youth who may be having these symptoms. And so our screening process looks a little bit different. I mentioned basically what happens if someone screens positive on the screener, they can automatically get referred to Prime, but then everything after that pretty much looks the same. So if they screen positive, then we do the phone screen, the evaluation happens, they get feedback, and then we can talk about what the current options for care or our recommendations are at that time. Just to show you all also what the screener can look like and how we've implemented it, we actually have it already embedded within REDCap, if anyone's familiar with that, which is a really easy to use online survey tool where they can administer this and it automatically scores for the person and can even get sent directly over to us. So since we've implemented this screening, you may be curious, like, how good is the screeners at detecting people and like what kind of outcomes have we seen? So we just briefly want to share that with you as well.
Okay, yeah. So over the past for a 3-year period, we've completed about 768 screenings with our three at intake with our three collaborators. About 40% of those people screen positive. That does not mean that they are at clinical high risk. It means just that they met a certain threshold for us. And through that, we've been able to, get about 54 evaluations from them, and about a good half of those, or about half of those, are individuals who are at clinical high risk for psychosis, and some even with who have already experienced a psychotic disorder. However, you'll notice as every step we go, we lose quite a bit of people. I think about 75% of them, people here either decline or lost to follow-up. And so while we think this is a useful thing, we know that oftentimes there are other providers in their life, and people what's called people decline for a lot of reasons or are too busy, and just need the extra support to get in with us. So we know that you all are very valuable in making sure that we can get those people involved. One of the things that we do that we're quite proud of with this screening effort is that we have identified that the people who are coming to us from the screening are reaching some of the places that we have traditionally been unable to like get a foothold in, and so places where levels of adversity in terms of their neighborhood adversity, so lack of like lower economic value of houses, less more exposure to lead paint, or environmental hazards, those kinds of things, as well as areas where there's less childhood opportunity. We've been able to get into as well through the screening process, which has been a great triumph of this thing and something that we're hoping to expand upon. But thinking more broadly about what our referral sources look like over the past 2 years, between the years of 2024 and 2025, about half of youth came from healthcare providers outside of schools. About a quarter of those came from our screening process. But our next largest and our third largest group of referrers, again, about 1 out of 8 referrals to us, is through school professionals. And so many of you all are integral referrers to us. And so we're very excited to be able to talk with you all, and would love to see that percentage increase too.
And I'll also say, I would bet you that some of these two categories, referrals from healthcare providers or from screening, I would bet you that many of them also initiated from a school-based referral, and that the school professional referred over to like a general mental health care provider who then ended up sending over to us. So I bet you've seen even more of these kids than we're able to describe here. So you've got this youth, you sent them over, we did an evaluation, they're identified as being at clinical high risk for developing psychosis. Now what? What happens? So once they're identified, one thing I want to mention is some people have, concerns about sending a youth over, about letting them know that you're concerned about these symptoms, or about having them go through the evaluation. I want to help relieve any of those concerns by telling you that when we do the evaluation with these young people, it is amazing to see the relief that you can just even physically see while they're being asked these questions. Because many of these kids are having these experiences, seeing things or hearing things or starting to develop beliefs that can feel quite scary to them. And they feel isolated and they're worried about what's going to happen if I talk about these experiences. They feel like they're going crazy. And so when we read them this list of questions that are their exact experiences, many of them will say, other people have had this? Or how did you know to ask me that? And it just is so validating of an experience for them that oftentimes we see people even get better right after the evaluation because it normalizes the experience a bit for them. So after that, once they're identified as CHR, there's a couple of things that you can look out for and that families can look out for and kind of our general recommendations. So one is that we don't really know what's going to happen with the young person after they're identified in terms of are they going to develop psychosis, stay the same, or get better. And so we really would like for you all to monitor for any changes in those symptoms. Are they getting worse or more frequent? Any additional change in functioning, right? Maybe they were coming to school 4 days a week and now all of a sudden they're not coming at all. Really trying to monitor for those changes, and they can always be reevaluated at our clinic too. The other big thing is because we think that the risk factors are a combination of biology and stress. One thing that we can do is to identify any excess stressors and try to help them reduce them. Stressors also, even though we think of stress often as trauma or big negative life events, stress can be even positive small events, but are changes in their life. So for example, my parent got a new job and they're making more money. That's great, but it's going to mean big changes in their life, and that can be stressful. And then also help them limit substance use. So we don't quite know why, and we can't quite predict who will be affected by substances such as cannabis. But if you have a young person who's using marijuana and having these symptoms, we often find that it can make these symptoms worse in some people, and we suggest limiting substance use as much as possible. In addition to that, we have some opportunities at the Prime Clinic that I want to mention. So one is we have historically had this treatment program through Prime. I do want to mention that our new enrollment for treatment, therapy, and med management is currently paused. And that's because the grant that we have that is funding our clinical care is expected to run out in September. And we don't currently have another federal funding opportunity to continue that with. However, what we are doing now is following an evaluation, which again is free. We are then able to provide training and consultation to community-based providers who we can then refer to out in the community. So we have this young person, we send them out to, say, a therapist or a psychiatrist in the community. We can then work with that psychiatrist to help them know what we would do if they were in care at our clinic. In addition to that, we have a lot of exciting research opportunities, paid research opportunities that youth are often enthusiastic to participate in. And these opportunities can help them learn a little bit about themselves and also continue to stay connected with Prime. We have a very exciting one that just came up that's actually a medication trial too, that's looking at ways to try to help youth who have been identified at CHR. This is a little bit about our care model, which again, treatment is currently paused, but if you do send a youth over, when our treatment does reopen, this is what they would experience. And what I want to highlight here is that what we do is called step-based care. So this means that when a young person comes in, they're not automatically given antipsychotic medication, and they're not automatically, they certainly aren't sent to the hospital. What we do is we give them gradual interventions, starting with basic psychoeducation and support. And then if their risk is maintained or they continue to have symptoms, they would get CBT for early psychosis. And then for those risks who are at relatively higher risk, they may elect for starting medication such as antipsychotic medication along with CBT. We also have things like peer and group options, and educational and vocational support. Okay, so I just want to transition to ensure that all of you have the support that you need. A lot of this you'll see in the slides, but just to highlight this, when you have families or parents that you're working with in a school setting for someone that you may suspect these symptoms or even who has been identified, just some pieces of advice here. So one is you want to frame the referral for an evaluation as information gathering, right? Not saying, I think, not delivering bad news that you think they have a psychotic disorder, but really to just say, like, I want to check in about some changes I've been seeing. I want to hear what you're seeing too. I think it's worth it just to take a closer look by sending them over to the crime clinic. You want to lead with observations and not labels, right? So whenever possible, we usually try to avoid the term psychosis in the first conversation initially, at least if a parent brings it up, unless a parent brings it up. And instead, you want to focus on the specific changes that you're noticing, right? He's saying that he's tired all the time and he's not sleeping. She's saying that she's withdrawing, or I've noticed that she's not talking to her friends anymore, right? And you want to talk about any experience that the student has described to you. Those will land better, especially with parents, than using a diagnostic term like schizophrenia or CHR. That's exactly what I'm showing here. And you want to invite their perspective early on in the conversation, right? Sometimes it can be hard for parents to process if you just come in hot and start talking about what you're seeing. But usually the parents will have noticed some of these changes too. It's usually not isolated to the school. So asking them, what have you been noticing at home? I've noticed some changes at school. Can you talk about what you've seen? And they may then be able to offer to you other things that they've been seeing that maybe you're not even able to see. And you also want to be honest about uncertainty, right? We're not saying that if a youth is showing these symptoms, this is a bad thing and that it's certainly true. You want to be honest that these experiences can mean many things. We really don't know what's clearly going on unless we have an evaluation. And doing that evaluation will help clarify what your child is experiencing and what supports may help them. That can be hard for parents to sit with, or for anyone to sit with, kind of navigating that uncertainty. So some suggestions here are conveying accurate hope, right? So if it gets to the point where you feel like you want to give them some advice, also we will do this on our end too, so don't feel like you have to do this, but something you might say to them is most youth at clinical high risk don't go on to develop a psychotic disorder. And early identification and support can help improve outcomes either way and provide them and you with the support that they need. You want to address common fears head on, right? People have seen TV shows and movies about psychosis, and they are oftentimes not real and very exaggerated. So, what you see in TV or movies is not the norm. Many youth experiencing these changes respond well when provided with the right kind of support. Helping them to reduce their guilt. Lots of parents experience guilt about whether, they think they caused these experiences or it was something they did in early parenting. We can just stop that right there and say CHR and psychosis in general is not caused by parenting. It emerges from some combination of biology and stress, and usually many factors that we can't control. You can give them concrete strategies to do at home, which is what we will also do as a part of the evaluation process, right? Keep track of sleep, try to help them get good sleep, monitor the household stress, including the parent's own stress, help them develop and practice positive ways to cope with stress, discourage substance use, as I mentioned, keep social connection and routines intact. A big thing here, avoid school avoidance. And I'm sure you can all appreciate that. Sometimes we do work with school systems who don't want to stress the youth out and they feel that the best thing to do is to keep the youth home. We strongly recommend against that and trying to keep the youth engaged in school. Once you get them out of school, it can be very hard to get them back in. So trying to keep them in the school day in some form. And then also connect them with some form of mental health care. If they won't come to us, anywhere that they'll go will be helpful. You can prepare them for the next steps, so walking through what a referral and evaluation will involve, and also reaffirm their role as parents. So they remain the most important people in their child's life, their advocacy for their child's mental health, and also their stability in their own mental health really matter for outcomes. I mentioned working with students or peers, especially those who are curious. And so they may, so for the students who are having these experiences, I already, talked about, you want to stay curious and matter of fact, using the student's own words that they're describing to you. You want to validate how scary or disorienting these experiences may be for them before you want to ask them for more information. Ask about the impact, not just the content, right? You've had this experience, but is it bothering you? Is it getting in the way of your life? Be transparent about confidentiality limits. This will help them feel more secure in talking with you, right? So many have a fear of being labeled or hospitalized. That's not necessarily the case. And if you can, you can reassure them that that's not going to happen unless you're really concerned about their safety. Um, and then you want to watch for shame, words that may suggest they're afraid or isolated. I have some examples here. When a peer raises concerns about another student, you want to always take that concern seriously and thank them. They may notice these changes before their adults in their life do. Stay non-confirming, of course, about the named student, right? So I can't share information about other students, but I want to hear what you're seeing. Ask what they're noticing, not for diagnostic details, right? So what worries you? You don't need a symptom inventory from the other youth. You can also help them. Sometimes, like the youth wants to know what they can do. And so you may say to them, stay connected. Be gentle with them. Don't leave them alone. Don't isolate them more. Avoid trying to just diagnose them. Just help them, encourage them to come talk to us. And I promise that we'll help them. You also want to check in on the reporting peer. So if a friend has, a peer has a worry about another student, we may not be able to release information, of course, to that friend, but they may be stressed out and it could affect their school performance too. So we want to keep checking in with them and always close the loop. Just let them know you're taking the concern seriously, even if you can't share what's going on. And then finally, some school-based accommodations that you may consider that we've seen helpful. So again, you'll all see this, you'll all get these slides and they've been shared in the chat. But these are some things that may be useful, if you've got a school psychologist who's putting together a kind of academic report, some things that may be helpful. I want to highlight especially the schedule and attendance piece. So sometimes being in loud environments, like in a cafeteria or in between classes in the hallway and all of that chaos can be very stressful for the youth that we work with. So I would, really consider that as an accommodation, especially to help them. They can leave early, go into the quiet hallway, or potentially eat lunch in more of a quiet location. Okay. And then finally, putting some of these supports in place. Always have families involved, which I'm sure you all do. We can also provide consultation, which I know was mentioned in the chat, and especially following an evaluation, we're always happy to join like a PPT meeting or something like that if that would be helpful for your school. And again, really want to highlight avoid school avoidance. So whenever possible, keep the youth engaged in the actual physical school. Okay, here's our contact information. We can follow up on some questions that are lingering, and we will share these too. I do want to mention, I forgot to mention the various ways you can contact us. So we do have a website. I think we're easily Googleable. You can search Prime Clinic at Yale. On that website, there is a form or a referral form that you can fill out. You can do that de-identified, or if you have a release, you can certainly fill in the youth's information. You can also call us. You can email us. You can contact either one of us, myself or Dr. Saxena, for any questions if you're wondering about how to handle a case.
Dr. Ferguson, can you, I know we have, I don't know where the latest brochures or information we have. Could you put that in the chat? That was requested. I see, I'm answering some other questions, but I see Susie's question, Susie Resgate. We are seeing more and more marijuana usage, whether it's a marijuana inducing the psychosis or marijuana just making symptoms that were already there worsen, that's an open question. But we are seeing more and more marijuana usage. If we could recommend, anything being less, like people using less marijuana, less vaping, hallucinogen use, those all things are definitely things that make things worse and increase risk for developing psychosis. Yeah. Oh, and also I want to, Liza had mentioned a little bit earlier concerning like this focus on suddenly occurring experiences. We don't necessarily mean like sudden as in out of nowhere. We are more thinking of like it's relatively recent changes for that person. But that could be like it's been happening for a couple of years. And it usually, it can happen in relationship to a stressor. So I think someone had mentioned someone had mentioned, what was it? Like starting high school. Like starting high school can be enough of a stressor. Oftentimes we actually do see the change in, so like there's so much transition that's happening that can be enough of a stressor where we start seeing those changes.
I also see multiple questions about ASD in the chat, which comes up at every single training that we do. So this is definitely a common thing that's been going on lately. So what we do know is that having a diagnosis of ASD does actually put someone at a slightly higher risk for developing a psychotic disorder compared to people without a diagnosis of ASD. The link between that is, I think, understudied and why that's happening. But just having a diagnosis of ASD does not rule someone out from getting an evaluation. In fact, that may be someone that you want to look at a little bit more closely and consider an evaluation. And what we really look at here is same as we do with the other youth that we work with is, some people may have had experiences in early childhood, things like sensory sensitivities, or beliefs or difficulty with social interactions. But what we want to look for is have these things either developed in the teenage years, like were they not present in childhood and they came on later in life, or have they really worsened or changed in some way? So did the youth have sensory sensitivities in childhood, but then all of a sudden at age 14, they started hearing what sounds like voices in their head? And so we tease that apart very carefully in our evaluation, but certainly have people who have comorbid both conditions.
I also saw a question from Heather about recommendations or advice that you would have for working with a student who's unable to accept that their delusions are not reality-based. The example is think teachers are going to kill them. What's it called? That's one of the specialties that we have here in our clinic is like trying to get at this being this curious, and then that's the way that the word the language of the interviews is also, or the questions is also to be like in a more curious, open-ended kind of way. And so we find that people are more willing to like talk about their experiences, and we have a big part of our thing is to identify the level of conviction and the impact of those kinds of things. If they're truly completely unable to accept that part of their beliefs are not true, then we might be considering, more of a full psychotic disorder. But it really does depend on the person specifically and their current situation. And so if that is something that's happening, we would recommend you reach out to us and we can definitely consult on that case.
Also, just practically, let's say, like I see the example is they think their teachers are going to kill them. Maybe the teacher is probably not the right person to make the referral. So I would, of course, if the youth won't talk to the teacher, if they're worried about that, talk to someone else. And also, in the moment before you even send the referral over, really just validating what that must feel like. Not validating that it's true, right? Because you don't actually think it's going to happen, but letting them know that sounds really scary. I can only imagine how afraid you are. I'd like you to talk to someone who can maybe help you figure out these feelings out. Um,
Emily,
Hearing Voices Network, yeah, shout out to them. They are great. Thanks for Sandy for recommending that.
was this Canva, are our Canva flyers okay to send?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if this was the one that we had. Okay, so I'm gonna send this one. We have a flyer that's a little bit. I'll also say we are more than happy to reach out to or to do individual like school-based presentations as well. And so if that's something you think your school would be interested in, we're more than welcome to come in and do a little bit more of a specific presentation.
You also get lots of phone calls from people just saying, like, I have a youth, I'm not ready to tell you who they are yet, but I just want to talk through how to have this conversation with them. And so we can always take that from you all.
Thank you both so much. I just want to apologize. I saw there was an issue with the QR codes. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but I'll try and fix that. But the links for the CECs and the course evaluation are both in the chat. Right now, you should also be seeing we've got 2 upcoming webinars. Both of them are next Thursday, and that concludes our webinar series for this year. The first one, youth suicide prevention, recognizing and responding to students at risk. That one, what has been approved for 1.5 continuing education credits. We are filling up fast, so if you'd like to join that webinar, I recommend you register soon. And if you have registered and your plans have changed, please make sure to cancel that so we ensure we have enough space. The next opportunity on Thursday, May 21st, that will not have CECs attached to it, but it's a great opportunity. It's a panel discussion being facilitated by the Office of Early Childhood, talking about bridging social, emotional, and mental health supports from early childhood through pre-K, kindergarten, and beyond. So that's another great opportunity. So thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to Emily and Abhishek. Sorry, I said that
Yeah.
wrong real quick.
Yeah. That's great.
Great. So thank you both so much. And I hope you all will join us next week for our final student support series of the year. And if not, if I don't see you, please take care and have a wonderful summer.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was great
Thank you.
talking to you all.
Thank you.